So I first fell in love with Argentine tango when I took my first dance class in a small dance studio in Covent Garden, and I saw my dance teachers tightly embrace each other with their chests and their cheeks touching and their eyes closed. And just like the thousands of incurable tango addicts around the world, the more I danced, the more I learned about life and love, and the more I realized that home was no longer a physical place, but in the embrace of my dance partners. Being a geography student by day and a tango dancer at night wasn't always easy, and for a very long time I was torn between these two passions I have. It was really hard to kind of reconcile these two aspects of my life until a professor of mine told me that I should read a book called The Geographies of Dance. And I never thought that that would actually be possible, and now that I think about it, I should have thought about it myself. Geography and dance, the geographies of dance. So I decided to write my dissertation about environmental protests. So I was doing research on my non-dance related dissertation, and I came across a group of dancers, and that gave me a really big realization. But before I tell you what that realization was, I would like to show you something. These are just some snapshots of news headlines that were in the news and The Guardian recently. And I wanted to ask you, how does seeing these headlines make you feel? Just shout it out, don't be shy.
Angry.
Scared? Okay, good. Hold this thought, because we're going to get back to it in a minute. We've been given the facts about climate change for more than 25 years, and there's more than 1,300 international environmental treaties in place. Yet, the IPCC and the WWF Living Planet report only give us 12 years to save Earth from the point of no return. And that is because climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's a social and political one as well, and it's one that requires all of us and our governments to act. So I decided to act by attending and researching environmental protests. And when I saw the dancers at the protest, I thought to myself, why don't we use the power of dance to address some of the dimensions of climate change? Now, how and why exactly can dance help us tackle climate change, you may ask? Well, there's 3 things about dance that make it possible. Firstly, dancing is one of the most natural things we do, and we all do it. And it's something we do from birth without having learned it. I'm sure you've all seen videos of like fat, cute babies jiggling on YouTube to good music. So researchers have actually found that humans are predispositioned to move rhythmically to dance and music. So secondly, dance is also universal. Every culture on Earth and a lot of religions have some form of traditional dance or sacred movement that's been passed down for generations. In fact, dancing is an activity dating back to prehistoric times that determined human survival, because it fostered culture, cooperation, and connection. And today, dance is still something we all have in common, no matter where we're from. And thirdly, dance is a shared form of nonverbal communication. To dance, you don't have to speak the same language. And it renders invisible the social divisions imposed by us by our class, race, gender, and all the many more that exist. To give you an example, I've danced tango in 21 countries now. Last week I made it 21. And my past dance partners reflected the beautiful diversity of people this planet holds in every combination possible. I've danced with old people, young people, big people, small people, and across people from the disability and gender spectrum. So when I dance with my dance partners, and quite often many of the countries I go to, they don't speak English and I don't speak the local language, like in Oman or in Israel and Palestine or the Czech Republic. But when we get into the familiar tango embrace and we close our eyes, our bodies naturally know the movements and the steps. So these three aspects about dance, the fact that it's so inherently human, the fact that it's universal across cultures, and the fact that it speaks to us without words, is a powerful tool that we can harness to address climate change globally. So before I move on, I wanted to ask you a question, but now I've kind of blown the question. I wanted to ask how many of you know where Kiribati is? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, good. So I'm a geographer, which is why I brought a map. Kiribati is a small island nation in the Pacific, and it's only 2 meters above sea level. And this guy is David Katuatau. He's an athlete from Kiribati who competed in the men's 105-kilogram weightlifting challenge at the Rio Olympics in 2016. And he also became a social media sensation during that time. But not because he won, but because he danced his way into a 14th place finish with a big smile on his face. So I want to show you what he did. Yeah. So David is my hero. In a video interview with Reuters, he said that most people don't know where Kiribati is, and that he wants to use dancing and weightlifting to raise awareness about his home before it sinks, because his actual physical home was destroyed during a cyclone, and extreme weather events have become much more noticeable in the Pacific due to climate change. And this is something I realized during my dissertation as well, that most of the discourses we came across in the media analysis only focused on three things: the complexity of writing international environmental treaties, the extinction of species, and the responsibility we have for future generations. And quite often in these discourses, we were missing the people today and the people in the global south that have been living at the forefront of climate change for decades already. People like David, who've been going through severe flooding, drought, and also sea level rise. And he used dance to collectively spread a very serious message. So in fact, he did a funny performance, but what he did by being funny is that he raised awareness about his home country, and I'm very sure that now all of you also know where Kiribati is and who David is. So throughout history, people have been dancing to express their thoughts and their opinions and their emotions, and most importantly, their opinions. A lot of artists and choreographers have created works of dance to comment on and protest this political status quo. Now, just in time for Brexit, the London tango community is going to be getting together to embrace the EU, although I hope it's going to stop Brexit. I don't think tango dancers will, but let's hope. But I want to take you away from Brexit and to my ancestral home country, Turkey. In 2013, I was in Turkey at the time of the Gezi protests, which saw 5 million people protesting on the streets against the police oppression and eviction of a peaceful sit-in that tried to protect a park. Basically, the government was trying to turn one of Istanbul's most important green spaces into a shopping mall. We were tear gassed continuously, beaten up, 8,000 people were injured, and 22 people were killed. And ultimately, these protests were about so much more than just protecting the trees and the environment, but it became about protecting our democratic rights and our freedom of speech. And throughout these protests, dance was always present. The Turkish State Opera, the Ankara Ballet, and the Turkish tango community gathered together to support the protests and dance the entire time while wearing gas masks and being tear gassed. For me, as an environmental activist and a dancer, it was incredibly powerful to see that the Turkish arts had our back and supported this environmental cause. And later, many, many dance performances were created to immortalize this experience we had and to turn dancing into a form of making public how the government is treating its citizens. And in 2016, Germany saw a lot of environmental protests rising, and recently, I think you've all seen this in the news, there's been protests everywhere, including London, with the Extinction Rebellion that's been carried over to Germany as well. So I joined 16,000 protesters in Berlin a couple months ago at a protest for a zero-carbon economy and against the federal government's failure to address climate change. And during these protests, something incredible happened. The German Tango magazine and Greenpeace Energy partnered up, donating money to charity for every dancer who switches to clean energy. And I think that's because they know what a tight-knit community we are and how much peer pressure we can exert. Because if one dancer does something, it's quite guaranteed that the entire dance community is going to be tagging along. And more importantly, this protest also led to the organization of a tango flash mob in front of the German Chancellor's office. Now, I get really emotional talking about dancing and protests, so emotions are the next thing I want to talk to you about. When I asked you how these headlines made you feel, all of you responded with what academics or scholars refer to as ecological grief or environmental anxiety. These are the feelings we have as we suffer climate-related losses to valued species, biodiversity, and ecosystems. But also climate fatigue. I mean, our everyday lives and news are so saturated with global ecological collapse and environmental crisis that climate change has also become an emotional issue. It's kind of rendered us emotionally overcharged in two ways. We're feeling sad, frustrated, angry, as you said, but also overwhelmed and apathetic at this continuous input and this doom that's awaiting us. Here's the good news. Dance can provide relief for these two states. The most obvious power of dancing is that it makes us happy. When we dance, our brains release more endorphins than during any other form of exercise. Endorphins are sort of the neurotransmitters that create feelings of happiness and comfort in our brains. So at this point, a lot of you might be thinking, this is great. Makes sense. I don't dance. How is this applicable to me? Good news again, you don't have to be a dancer to benefit from the positive effects of dance. So I want to share an experience I had in South London teaching wildlife conservation to children with you. And that's always a really tricky and dangerous task because you never know how many of them are going to step on your feet while they pretend to be an elephant. So this is Jimmy. Jimmy is a very, very cheeky 8-year-old who came to me after one of our classes, and he said, he's also always very direct, you know, these kids that sort of never have a filter. So he came to me and he said, you know what, I think the way you dance the giraffe looks weird. And I was like, okay, fine. And then he said, I've never danced before, but I know about climate change, and I know that polar bears are dying. I never really cared much, it never made me sad. But last week, when we did the polar bear, I wanted to cry. Arzu, I don't want them to disappear, because I am one of them now. You'll be very happy to hear that Jimmy now gives mini talks at his school, and he wants to be an Arctic scientist to save the polar bears. Yeah, he's so cute. And he's also wearing an extra jumper because he convinced his parents to turn the heating down. And he's super proud wearing his extra jumper to school, knowing that he's making a small little contribution for this very big issue. So to me, Jimmy really embodies the future. Climate change is an intergenerational problem. Some of us might not experience its full effects, but Jimmy and his classmates certainly will. And if we could use dancing to instill a little more environmental empathy in all of us, or at least half of us, imagine what the future of this planet could look like. Because the most important problem we're facing right now is that people are not acting on climate change because they're not feeling affected by it. And they're not feeling affected by it because they don't believe in it. For example, Trump. And we can really use dance, I think, to gather more of this empathy and awareness for the environment. Now, I said to you that you don't have to be a dancer to benefit from the positive effects of dancing. That is because just watching a dance performance can also prompt an emotional release and response. So dancing basically has this ability to create certain moods in us because it turns inner ideas into visible outward human form. And I want to show you what I mean by that by doing a little experiment. So let's watch 2 videos. One more. Okay, so it wasn't actually an experiment because I knew the outcome and I kind of told you about it too. When I looked into the room, a lot of you were smiling or moving with the beat. And this is kind of the point I'm trying to make. And even though none of you were dancing at the moment, you were moved by dance. So as I'm coming to the end of my talk, I think it's important for us to talk about what we're taking home when we're going. Because I'm going to be going back to Tango tonight, and you're going to go home and back into the world. And I really, really hope that all of you go home with the realization that dancing is part of our collective human DNA. And that dancing has the power to mobilize people around the world. Because it's so inherently human, because it's something all people share and all cultures share, and because it speaks to us without the need for words. And I think globally we can use this power to tackle climate change. So next time you see someone dance, or you dance yourself, think about how that experience made you feel. And I really hope that that spark you'll have inside you then will empower you to take action for this fragile planet's climate, just like it did for Jimmy. Thank you.